Okay, then here just for another one. This is actually a leaf in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, a fan painting. But just because I had a picture of silk production, here's a picture of a woman. Here's a detail of it, so I'll put on beside it. A woman spinning silk outside the door of her cottage. This is a poor family. Over on the right, there's a boy who's doing something with his back to us. I'm not sure what's going on there. And then in the a bit closer, here's another boy looking very poor and so on, feeding a younger child with a spoon out of a bowl. So it's a poor family making their living somehow by doing silk culture. Interesting for that. The painting is not all that great. It may actually be after the Sung Dynasty. The heavy contour drawing and the mechanical drawing of the leafage of the trees and so on somehow suggests a later date. Okay. Now then, another one which I will show and then bring back later when I'm talking about Southern Sung Academy masters. This painting is a hanging scroll in the Shanghai Museum, and it has no attribution. It's just anonymous. Probably something like late 12th century, early 13th, something like that. Southern Sung Academy. If I were to guess at an artist, I would guess maybe Liu Songnian, who's a figure painter of that period. There's a color reproduction of it as a frontispiece to my book, 3 Alternative Histories of Chinese Painting. So you'll find it there. At any rate, the theme, here's a detail of it, of the figures. I'll bring it back later and show it with numbers of details. It's a fine painting. Now, there are two different interpretations of what it represents. The standard interpretation, which the Shanghai Museum accepts and has in its labels and so on, is that this is the person in white here, the old guy, is the Emperor Xuanzong or Minghuang Mid-Tang, the great emperor under whose rule the rebellion broke out. He was the one who had the consort Yang Weifei and An Lushan who rebelled against him and so forth. Okay, then he flees down into Sichuan, but then somehow returns after the dynasty has been restored by his son. And this is supposed to be the meeting when the son, who's the person in red here, the new emperor, receives his old father coming back from exile. Well, maybe so. That would be a very good political theme for the Southern Sung. That is the idea of reestablishing the dynasty after problems. On the other hand, my good friend Li Lin San had another, maybe almost more interesting explanation of it, which I'll talk about more when we come to it. I'm going to show it under Liu Songnian, or under Southern Sung Academy painting. He believes it's a story from the Han Dynasty about an emperor whose old father was too frail to go back to his old village, and because he couldn't walk or travel that far. So the emperor had the whole village brought to him, all with its people and everything, and reassembled just outside the palace gates. And the old guy makes his way out and sees his old friends in the village. It's a lovely story. I don't know, whichever one. I'll talk about that when we come to it. We'll come back to it anyway. Now, here's another just to illustrate a really fine example of political painting as it was done on the Southern Sung court. There are several large hanging scroll compositions of this kind. This is the one most often reproduced and the one I had a detail from in my Skira book. This is the painting titled "Breaking the Balustrade." There's a detail from it in the Skira book. It's in the Chinese Art Treasures and so on. The story from the Han Dynasty again. A loyal minister named Zhu Yun, who's seen here at the left, clinging to the balustrade. Here, let's put the detail on too, the horizontal detail. Zhu Yun clings to the balustrade. He is serving under this Han emperor, and he is so angry at his political opponent, whom we see over here at the far right, sort of behind the emperor, holding a kind of scepter and cringing and looking properly guilty. Anyway, Zhu Yun is so angry with him that he asks to use the imperial sword, which you see here behind the emperor held by an attendant, asks to use the imperial sword to put him to death. And the emperor is angered by this impertinent, unprecedented request, and instead orders that Zhu Yun himself be beheaded. Zhu Yun clings to the balustrade and protests his innocence, and finally another minister, the one seen here in the foreground in the center, who's a friend of Zhu Yun's, intercedes on his behalf, and the emperor relents and commands that the balustrade, which is broken in the scuffle, be left unrepaired as a memorial. Here, let's see, we'll put on two details. The one on the right is the emperor with his two of his lady concubines who are behind, empresses, and then the bad guy on the right looking properly, kind of cringing, and then the servant holding the sword. And over on the other side is Zhu Yun clinging to the balustrade and the guards trying to take him away. And a wonderful big garden rock, two garden rocks behind them, very powerfully backing them up and giving an expression to them. At any rate, a quite powerful, dramatic painting. This is a positive expression of what, in fact, was a rather awful aspect of Chinese imperial rule. That is, the emperor would encourage criticism and ask his ministers to criticize each other or criticize his own rule or whatever. But in fact, then he would exact really terrible penalties if you did it the wrong way. If you did it in a way that seemed threatening to the emperor, or you came out on the wrong side from the emperor, then, boy, you and your whole family might be wiped out. This is, I say, a rather awful aspect of Chinese imperial rule. If you, again, if you want to find parallels to today's China, I mean, there was, not too long ago, there was Mao's 100 Flowers campaign, which everybody was encouraged to criticize, come out openly and criticize, and then they came out and then they were clobbered for doing it. And nowadays, even now, in principle, everybody's encouraged to raise objections to what's going on politically, or to criticize high officials and so on. And yet, if you do it the wrong way, you end up in jail. Well, okay, as I say, I don't need to make these parallels. They're rather terrible. Just as an appendix to this section on political themes, and before we turn to poetical subjects, I want to insert a section dealing with two important subjects in Southern Sung Academy painting, both of which had political implications, although their appeal goes far beyond any political or other function. They are buffalo and herd boy paintings and fish paintings. Here, to begin with, two photographs. I wish I had a photograph of a water buffalo and a herd boy leading it, but I don't have. Somehow I was never able to get that. Way back in the late 1950s, C.C. Wang and I, when we were in Taiwan, we wanted to get a photograph of a herd boy riding on the back of a buffalo playing a flute, as they do in painting. So we carried a flute around with us for a while in our taxi when we were out in the country. And on one occasion we did indeed meet a herd boy and the buffalo, and got out, and the taxi driver, who spoke the language, serving for us, actually tried to get him to ride on the buffalo's back and play the flute, seemed to, so that we could take a picture. And we offered him money for this. But he absolutely refused. We offered probably as much as his family makes in several months, but he still just wouldn't do it. He thought we were going to, I don't know what, steal his soul, who knows. At any rate, we never were able to get it, and I don't have a photograph of that kind. So you're going to have to put together the boys seen in the picture on the right, not the little girls. For some reason, little girls don't herd buffalo, and the buffalo seen in the picture at the left. Put them together, in other words. But it is a very common theme in Southern Sung court painting, and I'll show some examples. We saw before the example with the signature of Li Tang, which is in the Palace Museum in, is it Beijing? At any rate, one of the Palace Museums. And it's a hanging scroll with autumn leaves, autumn trees, quite wonderful, and a buffalo down below mooing. And the sound, the understood sound of the buffalo, somehow goes with the autumn leaves and the whole mood of the whole thing to make this kind of melancholy, pastoral, lovely effect. Okay, here's another one. Now, this is only from reproduction, I'm sorry to say. Paintings of this kind are also attributed to Yan Zeping, Li Tang's follower. And this one is in the Sumitomo collection in Kyoto. Here's a detail from it. Now, I don't, as I say, I don't have good slides of this, but I can talk about it anyway. It's only an attribution, but it's about right. It's the Southern Sung Academy style painting, and he did pictures of this kind. And it's again autumn leaves on quite beautifully drawn trees. The two herd boys in this case are asleep under the trees. One of the buffalo is wandering away. The other one, with its calf, is sleeping also. So these are mood pictures, and they're quiet and enjoyable. Well, speaking of, as we see the next one, about what these pictures actually were used for, what they meant, so to speak, how we are to interpret them. Okay, there's a hand scroll in the Nanjing Museum, also attributed to Yin Tzu-ping. No signature, just an attribution, but of the period and quite fine. 4 sections for the 4 seasons. I have slides of 3 of these. All right, here the boy is at the right, sitting and holding something, a stick with a string on it, maybe a frog, maybe playing with a frog, something like that, tied to the string. At any rate, one of the buffalo is wandering away again with its bridle dangling from its nose, and others are behind the tree. Here's a detail of the central part. See, I somehow didn't include whatever it is the boy is playing with on his string, but and then the two buffalo, or another again, it's maybe the buffalo and its calf behind the tree. Tree quite beautifully drawn, shaped with strokes and washes and twisting and so on. This rather loose drawing of the leaves belongs to the Southern Sung period, as does the loose dian, or dots that are scattered around the landscape. So we're seeing a Southern Sung Academy style picture from somewhere in the later 12th or 13th century, say. Okay, here's the water buffalo. These beasts are drawn quite beautifully with, they have a really understanding of the bulk, the way they walk, the way they raise their heads, everything about them. These are observed. Okay, as we go on now, here's another one in which the two buffalo are in the water, and the two boys, one of them fishing with a pole, and the other one, don't know what he is doing, this hand raised anyway. Now, this is a subject, as I've said, with associations of rusticity, bucolic ease, taking it easy in the country, closeness to nature, certainly, and paintings of this kind are used as political gifts or commissioned from artists to be presented as gifts. At least so later, we have inscriptions attesting to this. Pictures of this kind are given to people who are retiring, with the implication of, well, now you will be leading an untroubled life away from the city and administrative worries and such, like the cowherds. An idealized vision of what the person is looking forward to. Or a Ming example that I cite in my essay on political themes in Chinese painting. A scroll of this subject that is presented to an official who is going off to take a post as a prefect, with an attached poem suggesting that the man will give loving care to the people he administers, just as the herd boy gives loving care to the buffalo. Very nice image. So they could have various political implications and would be used for various, as I say, gifts and presentations. The next, please. Here's a winter scene from the same. Again, with quite beautifully drawn trees, shaped, twisting, and then the herd boy, in this case, on the back of one of the buffalo. This is a snow scene, the winter scene, and they're tramping across the snow. And he is lying on the back of one of them just for warmth, holding the bridle to be sure, but covered entirely with a heavy straw or reed coat, raincoat, warm coat, looking rather like a porcupine. Anyway, but that's a coat that they wear. You see them in other pictures, and some kind of a cap. So he's keeping warm.